Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name is Dan Lizette. Thanks again for taking the time to join me and listen. This is episode 125, and a quick welcome to all the new followers, listeners. Last week's episode did really, really well, and I hope you guys really enjoyed the conversation with Alana Levine from Little Known Facts. If you didn't, go back and check it out. People seem to really be enjoying that chat, and Alana is awesome. But let's get into this week's show. This week's show is brought to you by awesome people like yourself, the few, the proud, the most awesome people supporting the Podcast Digest on Patreon. Little as $1 a month helps the show take care of some of its overhead costs, so on and so forth. If you're interested in helping me out, this little one-man operation, there's a link in the show notes for Patreon. And of course, to my regular and favorite weekly sponsor, Podbean. Podbean is back again this week, folks. If you go to www.podbean.com/TPD, you'll learn more about their awesome podcast hosting and monetization, and you'll get your first month for free. But I'll tell you a little bit more about Podbean a little bit later. Let's get to this week's show. It's episode 125, and I'm back with my old friends at Wondery. I love them. They are doing some awesome work over there. And one of the shows that I've gotten into over the holidays, there was a little gap in a lot of show releases, right? So I went and checked out a whole bunch of stuff I'd been meaning to do for a while. And one of them from Wondery is a show called Terms. If you haven't heard of Terms, you're going to really dig this. It is an audio drama like no other, at least in its sense of parallels to reality. And I ask both my guests this week, these are the co-founders of Spoke Media, which is the studio where Terms came from. Lindsay Graham and Keith Reynolds are my guests, and we chat about all kinds of things regarding not just the show, but their journey with Wondery, what they do at Spoke Media, get a little techie here in the early parts, but it's a great conversation, and to just kind of hear about all that goes into producing a show like Terms is pretty eye-opening, and I think they're going to be a group to watch in the future, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, folks, let's get right to my conversation with Lindsay Graham and Keith Reynolds from Terms. Hello, folks, and welcome back. As I mentioned up front, my guests this week are from the show Terms. Have you heard of it yet? You should, and I'm going to give you a whole bunch of reasons why. They are the co-founders of Spoke Media and the main driving force behind the show Terms, Lindsay Graham and Keith Reynolds. Welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thank you. Yeah, hey, how you doing, Dan?
Thanks for joining me, gentlemen. I really appreciate, especially having both of you. You guys may already be familiar a little bit with Lindsay as the main narration, intro and outro on Terms, but I understand that both of you are sort of the ones who are the brainchildren behind the show, and I am in complete love with Terms, and I'm going to tell you all about why, folks, and why you should be subscribing. But before we jump into the show, I'd like folks to get to know a little bit about the both of you way before Spoke Media, which is your organization that's producing Terms, or the show itself. So let's start with you, Keith. Before all of this, what's your background?
Absolutely. We'll try to go not too far back and give you the Reader's Digest version. But I was a music school dropout who was doing some things in the music business that were a lot of fun and interesting things and working with some notable people. But I was still sleeping on a friend's floor when I got a call from audible.com to go do an engineering gig over there. Ended up kind of falling in love with audiobooks and the format, and really dove in and worked my way up to becoming a director at Audible. So I worked there for about 8 years. And then in 2015, my wife and I were looking for a change of weather, quite frankly. And she's from Dallas originally. And, I was not quite sold on the idea. I love Dallas as a city, but honestly, mostly I'm unemployable outside of New York and LA. And then I figured out that Dallas has this amazingly deep pool of talented VOs, largely because of the anime and video game industries, but also a lot of commercials and a lot of films are done here as well. So there's an amazing pool of talented actors. And I thought, you know what, I might actually be able to make a living down here. So in 2015, relocated, started a company called Stories Unbound with an eye toward audiobook production. I met Lindsay, who owns a studio here in town, and we started working together. And it soon became obvious that we had kind of similar ambitions for larger forms of audio storytelling. And so in December, we started taking pitches, and Lindsay actually, after we took a bunch of pitches, we were in love with a couple of ideas. And then Lindsay said, you know, I've had this thought kicking around for like 20 years. Hear me out. And he and the writer, Rob McCollum, who writes Terms with Michael Federico, who had pitched us a show about an assassin that we really loved, and we were going to go with it. And so we're sitting there with him, and he said, no, this is the idea. We got to go with Lindsay's idea. This is amazing. And so that's kind of how we got to the point of Terms. So that's kind of my story from beginning to end. And I guess I'll pass it over to Lindsay to talk about how he got here.
Sure. Well, as Keith mentioned, I have a small little recording studio here in Dallas and have for, good Lord, 15 years. Did mostly music production, composing for commercials and radio and TV. But it was all kind of a sideline business that I did on nights and weekends. I did the normal 9-to-5 thing in corporate environments. In 2015, I had the gumption to try and actually stop being in the cubicle and make the studio more of a real going concern. The timing was pretty good because that's right about when Keith showed up. And so we quickly developed our plot together. And then, we always had designs on putting something out into the podcast space, and Terms was one of the first things that really, had any hooks.
Excellent. And there's going to be a link to Spoke Media as well as all the links we're going to talk about in the show notes, folks. And I just wanted to point out real quick, gentlemen, kudos to both of you for probably the best bios ever featured on a company website. There's a lot of couch sleeping and no free time, and it's refreshingly honest, really.
It's so strange writing a bio, and both of us having worked in various parts of the entertainment industry for years, you find yourself doing this, and it's always so weird because you read these bios and the person who wrote it is the person you're reading about, and yet they're talking about themselves in the third person, and so that's weird enough, and so we just wanted to the whole thing is strange, so we just wanted to have a good time with it.
Well, I thought it was great. And I said, what's funny is that we were talking earlier about the individual sort of connected all of us, and he provided them in advance of our conversation. And I wasn't sure where that came from. I'm like, this is really odd. And then as I jumped into the website, I was like, oh, it's on their website. This is great. So before we get into Terms specifically, because that's going to be the crux of our conversation, and there's lots to talk about there. But as I've said many times, and folks listening know this, I've theorized that about half my audience is probably other podcasters. And combing through Spoke Media's website that you guys have got, there is just all kinds of great technical awesomeness in here that a podcaster would love to know more about. So either one of you, can you tell us a little bit more about Spoke Media, what they do, what the setup is, or what you guys have going on over there?
Absolutely. I think maybe I can talk a little bit about Spoke and what we're doing, and then might want to. Lindsay is definitely. I am the world's worst recording engineer. I am technically a recording engineer, but I'm pretty terrible. So maybe Lindsay will offer up some podcasting tips. But Spoke. It was initially founded under this idea of finding ways to shape the future of audio storytelling, and we're at a very exciting moment, both in podcasting and audio books, both economically and creatively. And it's a very exciting thing to be on the edge of that wave as it's cresting. And I think 2017 is going to be a big year for that. And we wanted to make sure that we were kind of putting ourselves in a position to have the voices that we thought were worth hearing, giving them a chance to be heard. And so that's, with terms and some of the other things that we're working on. We've got a great show that called Dichotomy that's in the works right now that's exploring immigration and gentrification and a lot of different issues. So it was important for us to both kind of get out there creatively and be making exciting things, but also to kind of become a place where people who don't normally have the opportunity to get into this business but have great ideas and great concepts can find a way to get their work turned into something special. So we've got a lot of different facets and a lot of different things that we're trying to work on, but we try to keep to those core ideas as we go through it.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Lindsay, maybe you can talk a little bit more. Like I'm looking at the website here, and you guys have everything sort of specced out that's inside the studio, and there's so much to talk about, and I don't want to get too nuanced here, but one thing that I'm sure some people listening to this are going to wonder is you guys have about a dozen different microphones that are apparently outfitted inside the studio. Why is that, and what are your thoughts generally for, say, a microphone for podcasters?
Okay, well, the reason for the array of microphones is really that this is a music production studio. It is completely overbuilt for podcasting, but that lends us a vast array of colors to choose from. We don't often use them because they're specialized microphones that do well, for instance, on kick drum and nothing much else. But in terms of the voice recording, we've kind of settled on a couple of pieces of equipment that really suit audiobook production very well. And the technical requirements for audiobooks are extraordinary. The noise floor has to be just zero. And so we kind of built the studio with an ear towards getting the cleanest signal possible. And that right now includes Neumann TLM 103 mics, which aren't their top of the line mics, but they are their lowest self-noise mics. And then a preamp from Earthworks, which again is pretty much straight wire with gain. There's nothing, no coloration, no buzz, no hum, and so we get a really nice clean signal. And then in addition, we've put a lot of effort into just the acoustic properties of the studio. The walls are about a foot thick, full of very high density fiberglass, and it's a pretty dead room. So our ability to capture the voice and nothing else is nearly unparalleled.
And I think that's the key when you're talking about most podcasters. I think it's you want to get the best mic. Like we're sitting here talking on one of these the Shure KSM 32s, which are that's like a $500-600 mic, which is going to be great for most podcasters, and you can even get away with going cheaper. But I think the key is to look for something, both a microphone and a preamp, that doesn't give you a whole lot of self noise, because you're not looking for color, you're not looking for anything fancy like that. You just want something that's going to not give you a whole lot of fuzz and buzz. And then the key then is to really get into a tight and soft-walled recording environment. We're upstairs in the lounge of the studio right now because we've got some sessions going on downstairs. So you can kind of hear the reflections of the walls and things like that. And so whenever possible, when you're doing a podcast, especially when it's a couple people talking, you want to try to get into a tight room, even getting into your closet and surrounding yourself with coats. Anything you can do to kind of deaden that sound is the way to go.
It's super interesting, and we could geek out for a very long time on this type of stuff. But yeah. I was looking at the list, and I'm like, I don't know. I felt this like pang of disappointment that mine wasn't on there, and I thought I was doing pretty good.
What's yours?
The Shure Beta 58A.
Ah, okay, yeah, that's a stage mic. We have the SM 7.
57, I saw.
Well, not the 57, but the 7, kind of the more radio, FM radio.
The SM7B.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much good stuff out there. And honestly, I'm on my third microphone in 2.5 years because I keep sort of upgrading and changing. There's another podcaster that a lot of my listeners may know that are big tech people. I'm a huge tech guy, especially an Apple guy. And Marco Arment from Accidental Tech Podcast recommended the one I'm using as his personal favorite for podcasters. So it's definitely served me well. But I like the array because I imagine that everyone, depending on their voice quality or their environment, may have something that works better for them. And, I think it's great that you guys have the library to kind of select from.
Absolutely.
But that's the technical stuff. Let's get on to the fun stuff here. So you mentioned a little bit about sort of the origin story for terms. We're here to talk about terms, and so maybe within that context of what we've been talking about with Spoke and some of the things you guys were going after, talk about how sort of the origin process for terms happened, maybe even the idea of leading up to partnering with Wondery.
Absolutely. So, like I said, in December of 2015, we decided that we wanted to start developing a nonfiction podcast, but also a fictional scripted series. And so we started taking a lot of pitches from a lot of very talented writers. And we had kind of gotten into an idea that we really liked. And then Lindsay kind of, sat down with me and the writer that we were going to go with, Rob McCollum, and said, all right, this might sound a little crazy, but hear me out. And it was one of those moments where we're sitting on we're in Texas, but it still does get cold in December. And we were sitting out on a patio at a bar, and one of those moments where you just forget how cold it is outside. And both Rob and I were just like hands on chins in hands and elbows on knees, just staring at Lindsay like, yes, absolutely, we must do this. But it's an idea that he's had kicking around for a long time. So I should really let him kind of take it from here.
Well, probably everyone has had those late night college conversations that last way too long and probably involve chemicals, and this was one of them. It was just an idea that we started. I'm trying to remember. I'm having to cast back 20 years or so, but this was around the time of Clinton coming into office, so 92, and there's just a thought. Well, what if the president doesn't want to leave? And the original idea was a movie script, as most ideas are, I guess. And we had cast in our heads Sting as the president-elect, just a swarmy, evil person. So it was a fun idea. And
just to be clear, we love Sting. Sting's lawyers. Right. Please don't call us.
No, but I think I had just watched Dune and had him in mind. The idea is really at its fundamental, what would happen if someone said, "Screw this! I'm not paying attention to the rules." And how much could 1, 2, 10 people do if they make these decisions? And from there, we started building the actual storyline from that kernel of an idea.
So let me just rewind just a quick second. So you guys, with the background, at least for you, Keith, in audiobook production, and Lindsay, you've got the studio set up with all the music background, so on and so forth. I can certainly completely see, and I've talked to many other folks who want to get into podcasting. But the idea of a fictionalized podcast that's going to involve actors and this, that, and the other, this is a huge undertaking for sort of an initial effort. Why fiction and why not something else? Was this just a passion project to start, or did you just really see a market here?
Well, I think for me, it's a little column A, a little column B. Right. I think we can certainly, it was oddly enough, we had no idea it was coming, but Homecoming came out the same week that Terms did. So we're certainly not the only ones to see this art form emerging, and it's been a staple in Europe for a long, long time. I mean, BBC audio dramas are some of the most lavish productions that you'll ever find. For me, it was I'm not much for movies, but I am a TV junkie. I love scripted series. I love something that a movie to me is simultaneously too long. I don't want to sit there for 2.5, 3 hours. And it's also too short to tell the story that I want to hear in 2.5 to 3 hours. So the idea of this kind of scripted, serialized, unfolding story in the audio world certainly appealed to me quite a bit. So I think that was an initial, and it also felt that was kind of the skill set that we were coming from, was this audio storytelling. With our other show, there's a lot more reporting involved, and it's very much like a narrative reporting podcast, and that's been a slower process because it's been a lot more things for us to learn in that area.
And I have a lot of experience and friendships in the actor community here in Dallas. I've known Rob McCullum for 15 years, and he and I have participated in some form or another on dozens of short films and corporate videos, and probably most notably why I know that I work well with him creatively. We almost every year for a couple of years there, we would participate in something the Dallas Film Video Society puts together, a 24-hour video race.
Oh, yeah, you guys won that a couple years ago, right?
So, and that's a great exercise. If you are unfamiliar with the concept, at midnight on Friday, they give you a couple of prompts, like a theme, a line of dialogue, an object, a location, and something else. And you have to go out and write, shoot, edit, score, and turn in your best short film that meets all those criteria. And it's an exhausting but really rewarding creative exercise, and just taking those sorts of creative relationships and extending it was pretty easy.
Yeah, and then that's, we should really at this point give a huge shout out to everyone involved with Terms, particularly the actors, because they took a big leap of faith with us on this as well. And, we did the entire thing pro rata per sui. I'm still getting used to saying it. But for those people who aren't familiar, it essentially means the actors do their work for free up front. And then as soon as we start bringing in money, then they get paid, and they're the first ones to get paid. But that said, they still took a big leap of faith to give us their time to make this project work. And as you can tell listening to the show, I mean, they're absolutely fantastic. And then the reason why we're even able to do this.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more, Keith, in terms of the actors being fantastic. And it is exactly where I was going to go next. Thank you for the segue, which is you guys leave that bar in December of 2015, 15. And you've got this idea. So you've got your writer, you've got your story. Obviously, you guys are bringing all the audio production components to it. But then I imagine casting is up next or somewhere early on the list. How does this process happen to find these awesome people?
Well, luckily, we just knew them. If you go back and watch some of the 24-hour video race things that we put together, you'll notice that the president, and First Lady, and many of the other actors are in those as well. So it's a community that we know, and it was very easy to cast. Just because we all agreed. Mike, Rob, and I sat around on Rob's porch one night and said, okay, we've got the first 3 episodes written. We know who the characters are. Who's playing them? And I don't think we really had much disagreement about who was perfect for what role. It happened very quickly.
Absolutely. I mean, especially the president and Dunwalk were just, that was going to be Jeff and Brandon from the get-go. I mean, they're just made for that.
So when you guys were starting to talk about story and you're working with Rob and you're kind of fleshing this all out, did it just sort of actors that you were familiar with just start slotting and you're like, oh, this person would be perfect for this, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't write for an actor. The parts were written unto themselves, but then it just became quickly evident that these actors were good for it. Now, in subsequent episodes, once we had heard the voice and tenor and pattern of each actor, it became much easier to write dialogue for the person. And I think it just got better and better for that reason.
Absolutely. And I want to really quickly interject here because we keep coming back to, we're talking about Rob McCollum a lot, who has been instrumental from the beginning. But as soon as we kind of settled on this idea, Rob immediately said, I need to bring someone else in to write with. And I've got the perfect guy, Michael Federico, who's done a lot of amazing work. And he plays Daniel Schwartz on the show as well. And he has been just as instrumental as Rob and Lindsay in the creation of this thing.
So let's talk about the production process a little bit. Did this all happen right there at Spoke in Dallas? And was everybody in the room at the same time? Or sort of how did the production work?
Yeah, everything's recorded here in Dallas in the Spoke studios that we're in right now. We didn't make a conscious decision to do this, but we decided not to follow kind of the live action field recording model that I know a lot of podcasts do. We wanted a lot more control over the performances, being able to edit and kind of create soundscapes. So we will record people in a very dead booth. It's important to get the actors, facing each other and comfortable, so that they're actually acting and not just narrating into a microphone. But we conquered that pretty quickly, especially in the first couple of times of recording sessions, where we really had to remind the actors to look up from the script and watch the other person they're interacting with, and get them into a kind of a stage or film acting mode rather than voiceover, which they're all accomplished at and quite experienced with. But it's a different feel. And so once we kind of got that method down, then we'll, depending on actor availability and schedules, we'll record portions of episodes, and they're not done in order or anything, as much as we can. And then it becomes an editing and mixing, procedure.
All right, folks, let me jump in here just a quick second. We'll get right back to that conversation in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about this week's awesome show sponsor. I know a lot of you are listening are probably podcast super fans or other podcasters. And if so, I think you're really going to love our sponsor this week. They're Podbean, podbean.com. They are podcast hosting and monetization. And if you're interested in starting your own show, if you want to do this thing too, one, please do it. More great shows are what I love. Or if maybe you're a little dissatisfied for whatever the reason with your current hosting provider, you may want to open your eyes and take a look at Podbean. They've got some awesome stuff I want to tell you about. They offer all the great statistics on the performance of your show. I'm just going to start mentioning that one up front because stats are a big deal. I'll tell you how your show's performing. But also, if you've got that existing show, they're going to help you come over and join the Podbean family. They're going to be able to import and redirect your show to migrate it over. For those of you starting out, all the RSS and iTunes support you're going to need. You're going to be able to set up your own website and customize it with different themes and colors, or you can integrate it into your existing website if you've already got that show or just a site that you've had personally that you want to repurpose for your podcast. When you join Podbean, you'll also join their online directory, and you'll have some great promotional opportunities, and they'll help sort of expose your show to their audience as well. When you do publish a new episode, it's got a great embeddable player. You're going to be able to share it automatically to all your socials. We all love the social media, and it's a big deal for kind of growing your audience and getting the word out. If you want an app, they can help you with that, both for Android and for iOS. All of that is available. And if you want to take your show to the next level, really kind of start to get something back on this, you can even look at some of their integrated monetization tools. You can designate episodes as premium. They have a full-blown advertising platform that you'll be able to utilize, and even their own patron program where your listeners can support you directly. Podbean offers all this and more. What I want you to do, if you're interested in what I'm talking about here, go to podbean.com/TPD for the podcast digest. And you can learn even more about this stuff. Click over all the features, kind of get an idea of everything I've been talking about. But if you sign up through that special URL, they'll give you your first month for free to try out. So Podbean is a great way to either take your podcast to the next level or to start your own show. Check them out, podbean.com/TPD, and my thanks to Podbean for supporting the Podcast Digest. Now, back to my conversation with Lindsay and Keith. You mentioned a moment ago, Lindsay, that sort of as the actors were cast and you sort of heard the tenor of the voice, and et cetera, that writing to that could potentially change. So I'm curious, when you guys sort of set out, were the first 4 sort of ready to go, or 6, or was it all done but maybe you made tweaks down the line? How did that work?
Yeah, the first 3 were pretty much written pretty quickly. We had an idea that we were going to come out of the gate with 3 and then write, record, and release at the same time, which has proven to be pretty hectic. But episode 1 was revised countless times. We probably recorded the whole thing at least 3 times as we realized and just learned, frankly, what works and what doesn't. We needed a bigger. We had no idea what it sounded like when we were first writing it. It was just on paper. So the idea of audio transitions and the idea of what music could do or couldn't do, what soundscapes we needed to build and how they add or detract or from the performance was all new to us. And so I think it was painful, to go back and tread over ground we thought we had conquered, but totally necessary. And so, yeah, I was really pleased. And I think the entire team was, when we finally got to a cut of the first episode, that we thought, okay, this is something worthwhile.
And I want to ask one more question along the idea of sort of the recording environment. I could be wrong, and I listen to so many things, so I need to couch this statement in that I have 110 shows I subscribe to. But I believe you've started to add a little bit more on sort of the post-episode conversation in some episodes, and didn't on one of them, was it episode 5, Upstate, that you talked about it being recorded outside?
Yeah, that's true. That's actually the only piece of the dialogue wasn't recorded outside, but Rob was on vacation in Montana and thinking about episodes, and just happened to be trudging through some shin deep snow, and realized that the sound he was creating was perfect and kind of informing his idea of what the dialogue of the scene should be. So he just pulled out his iPhone, and there was no field recording gear required here, and just recorded him walking. So kind of, it totally worked. And it was nice to actually put something, a talisman of meaning, into the sound design.
At the time of this recording, folks, 8 episodes are out in the wild of a 13-episode run. And, gentlemen, for what it's worth, so far, episode 5 was my favorite. Just had to put that out there.
Upstate with yes. Senator Schiller? Yeah, Senator Schiller, he's a canker sort of a guy here.
The back and forth between the two of them was just riveting, as far as I'm concerned. So I think that's why I remembered that tidbit of the outside component that you described in sort of the post-show chat.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it really is. It's fascinating to these guys write the whole thing and direct and produce it. And by the time I start really getting involved with the episodes, it's just editing down the performances, and you edit these things down, and you're trying to get, the best possible thing that you can get, but you're really just listening to the 2 people in the room. And then, you're trying things out. Maybe this will work. Maybe this won't work. And then Lindsay comes in and fills out the soundscape and builds out these worlds. And the number of times where, he's taken a performance that wasn't quite working just in a dead space, and all of a sudden it makes so much sense in the environment that he's got it in. Or, he builds the environment. It's like, okay, yes, this is the direction. Maybe we need to change this line or do that. And that informs the storytelling so much. And like the episode you're talking about, with the footfalls in the ground, there's a moment when Ron the line is something like, "Why don't you just tell me, Senator?" Like there's this pause, and we get the impression that Ron is sick and tired of being there, but we hear just a couple of little, not even footsteps, but just you hear Ron shuffle from side to side, and you immediately have this image of him rubbing his hands on his coat and blowing into his hands and being extremely cold. And then it gives so much more impact to the line that comes afterward.
Yeah, it's just all of the sound work that you and the team have put together throughout all the run so far that's been released have always granted that environmental vision, whether it be inside an office or outside in the snow or whatever the case may be. It seems to fill out one's mind's eye when they're listening along. And that was one of the reasons why I asked sort of the production process, because to know that this sound bed that one is hearing started in this dead-end studio is that much more amazing.
Well, thanks, man. I think you do. I think everybody that gets into the creative process, no matter what it is, you inform as much as you can going in, but you find no matter how many times you've done something, so much is just trial and error, and you'll look back on the number of times you'll see an interview with a director or a musician or writer or something, and the reporter is talking about, so yeah, this thing that you've done that's become this very conscious and iconic thing, and the creator responds with like, yeah, I don't know, I was just trying to make it work. Like it's just so yeah, I think it's worked really well for us, fortunately.
It makes me wonder too, with this much, I don't know, capability, this much ability to create this way, does that sort of finalize your buy-in on future projects for this method of approach? Oh, you mentioned, Lindsay, earlier about having sort of the control with the actors and so on. Or is there this thought in the back of your mind that maybe someday you may do more sort of, on-site recordings dependent upon the content?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Keith is right. We're just trying to get something that worked. And in that same spirit, I think you can't stop experimenting and find the better thing that works. Even better. So I would be really excited in doing a much more live acted environment show. I find the sound design of some other podcasts, like Homecoming, to be really interesting and very, very different from Terms. Terms is a clean, uncluttered production space, and it's probably kind of reserved in its use of the field of sound. It's there to put just enough in to add the realism or not even realism, but clarity of the intent of the story. I think you can go the other way and make it hyper realistic, and that would have its own effect. So yeah, I've thought quite a bit about kind of ethos of sound design and what may be the next step for a different project. I'm totally interested in what happens next.
Yeah, I think we're at a curious point where guys like Lindsay are kind of becoming the directors of photography, if you will. If that's kind of the analog, where there are all these different kind of styles to play with, and it's really their job to create this image in the listener's mind, and there is such a brilliant art to that.
Absolutely, and it's interesting you draw that contrast sort of between, say, Homecoming or other shows, right? There are other shows that are kind of in this fictionalized world, the Black Tapes or Limetown and so on and so forth.
Life After,
right?
So
there hasn't been a ton of them yet, but it's interesting as it becomes more and more of a thing that I think listeners are really sort of tuned into, because one of the reasons I asked you sort of the earlier question about why a fictionalized podcast versus another style is that I think, and this is just me, and I could be wrong, maybe I'm speaking for some people, but at least for myself, I think it's a different ask of a listenership. And what I mean by that is that, I'm the type of person who has an earbud in, and I'm not exaggerating, probably 10 hours a day. And one of the reasons I'm able to do that is that so often podcast listening can be a passive activity while you're doing something else. But a fictionalized podcast, especially a fictionalized podcast, needs to do so well with the storytelling element and grab you away from it and make it more of an active listening. And Terms did that for me. But if I'm honest, some others haven't done that. And what I realize is you tune out for 45 seconds because you're paying attention to something else. You come back and the story's passed you by. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is one of the challenges of sort of the fictionalized podcast, is that it needs to be a much more active process for the listener. And some of these elements we've been talking about, I think, ensure that.
Absolutely. Well, it's like we talked a lot about when we were starting this whole when we were talking about partnering. Is NPR has, I think they built a whole campaign around it where there are these driveway moments, right? Where you wanted the story to be just so compelling that the listener isn't turning off their car and they're sitting in their driveway for 20 minutes to figure out how it turned out. And you're right, with audio fiction, that's almost you have to get that out of the entire show. You can't just build moments of that. It has to be the whole thing, and you really have to draw people in. And that is a very tough thing to do. And I'm glad that Lindsay and Rob and Mike succeeded in doing that with Terms, at least for you anyway.
And I think for many others, and folks, if you haven't subscribed and listened to it, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Link in the show notes. Go do it. Because this is one of the things I love about what you guys are doing is that in the back of my mind, and this may not have been intention or otherwise, but it always reminds me of sort of the Netflix model, right? Because people hopping on now or whenever this whole thing is done, this is perfect because these are not extraordinarily long episodes, right? We're dealing with 15 to 23 minutes, depending on the episode.
Yeah,
completely
roughly.
bingeable, and we'll hold your attention in as long as you need. It's almost like I love, you're talking about books earlier. I like probably billions of others love James Patterson. And one of the James Patterson signature features to me is like really short chapters, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got tons of breaking points. And that's sort of like the audio equivalent of that Terms is sort of going for, I think, because it's like short chapters and just enough to kind of keep you going from episode to episode.
Absolutely. Our goal was to keep everything under 25 minutes, and not just for Terms, but for a lot of the things we're doing. A certain amount of it is tied to commute times. A certain amount of it is tied to kind of going after that half-hour television model. It's honestly I think the greatest compliment we've gotten so far is that all of the complaints about the show have been the episodes are too short. So that's a great thing to keep hearing over and over again.
Well, and I think that you get independently. I would say, yeah, I would be one of those ones complaining, right? But I'm complaining only recently because now I'm on track. I think I started at 5 or 6, and so when I started, it was like boom, and that was when I reached back out to you guys and I said, I want to talk to these gentlemen, because I was 5 or 6 in and I realized how awesome it was. But there is something about that sort of bingeableness that I think definitely is appealing to people because they don't have to wait. Or even if it's not, to me, it's not so much as a wait as remembering where the story last left off. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? With somebody who listens to as many things as I do, sometimes after that week or so wait, I'm like, where were we? Wait a minute. What's going on? Where do we stand? And that's why I think folks hopping on now, and why I encourage you to do so, dear listener, is that you won't have that problem. You'll be able to get right in on a lot of the backstory up to this point.
Absolutely. By the time a lot of you are listening to this, we should have 9 episodes out. So we got plenty to binge on right now.
Yes. I want to switch gears ever so slightly, gentlemen, and I want to make sure we talk about another name that a lot of people are seeing when they see Terms, and that is your partnership with Wondery. Previous guests on this very show include the CEO of Wondery, Hernan Lopez, as well as, I believe, Wondery's first original program, which was Found, Davey Rothbard. Check, folks, back catalog. Both those conversations were pretty awesome. And now you guys are sort of my third guest from the Wondery world. Can you tell us a little bit of backstory about how that came to be and what the experience has been like?
Absolutely. Well, the experience, first of all, has just been absolutely fantastic. I cannot say enough good things about Hernan Lopez and Jeffrey Glazer and the whole team, Royce Wadsworth and Caro over there. Have just been absolutely fantastic. They're so much fun to work with, all great guys. And so it's been a lot of fun and enlightening to work with them and to learn more about their side of this business. But the whole thing came about. We shopped the first 2 episodes around to a bunch of audiobook distributors 2 weeks before we were set to release, and a handful of podcast companies. So 2 weeks before the election, shopped it around. Nobody wanted it. Nobody was interested. And then on election night, started getting phone calls. Those
that had heard it and realized what was happening.
Yeah, suddenly it went from a fun thought exercise to holy cow, this is paralleling reality. So we talked to a few folks, and actually Michelle Cobb, who is the head of the Audio Publishers Association, which is kind of the trade industry of or the industry organization for audiobooks. She had listened to the show, and she had actually just talked to Hernan and thought we'd be a good fit. She put us in touch with Hernan, and after a couple of conversations, it became immediately apparent that Wondery was the way to go, and I'm very glad that we did. It's been great working with them.
And Wondery has created a pretty phenomenal stable. I'll tell you what, I mean, I first heard about them at Podcast Movement at Chicago 2016, and they were just getting off the ground. They had a few partner shows and Found hadn't even launched yet. To now be 6 months later, to see where they are and what's been coming out and what's been happening, their additions they've made, and I think it's something to watch for anyone who's into not just sort of fictionalized podcasts, but many of the other styles. You know, Found is obviously dabbling in a more of sort of an NPR style, if you will, and I think it's a thing to watch, and I'm really glad to hear that you guys have enjoyed your time there.
Absolutely. I mean, they are just, I think Hernan's got a great vision for not just Wondery, but for the industry as a whole. And I think they're going to continue to do big. I mean, you look at Hollywood and Crime, and the debut that's had has been fantastic. Also, we're big fans of Fred Greenhalgh's work with The Dark Tome and The Cleansed, Story. Oh my God, I'm blanking on the title of it, but they've got it's Story something that's absolutely amazing, and I'm totally choking on the title at the moment. But yeah, they've got just some great programming over there.
So let's talk about this gentleman. This is the elephant in the room, and I did not want to make it the core of the conversation, but every fan of Terms that has tuned in to this show to hear my conversation with the two of you wants me to get into this in terms of you already mentioned it, Keith, the parallel with reality. So I'm sure you guys have a lot of these talking points prepared, so let's just run it down. This was not planned. There was a lot of coincidence here, and just kind of go on what this experience has been like, given the reality we all now live in.
Well, you're right. I mean, it certainly wasn't planned, and I have been asked quite a bit about the parallels between this election cycle and Terms, and so knowing that we kind of devised the entire plot in December of 2015, it is impossible for us to have taken too much from true life. But what we did is imagine kind of worst case scenarios and
that's not encouraging, Lindsay.
Right? Yeah. So we had at our disposal a large group of Republican candidates, from very straight down the middle to weirdly left of or right of center, and we got to pick and choose our personality traits, and for when we were contemplating who Dunwalk was going to be, we had just this idea that he would be a populist like Trump, but a conniving politician like Cruz, and maybe had some of the looks and swagger of Rubio. Trying to come up with some sort of Frankenstein candidate that might surprise everyone and take an election out from under the ordinary course of business. Now, of course, as the election went on, that's exactly what happened. Not exactly.
Weren't those the final three?
Yeah.
Were you guys thinking at some point, oh my God, it's the final three?
Yeah. It wasn't until Trump's real ascendancy that we sort of decided that this might be a problem for us. And we didn't know how to handle it. It really came to a head when Michael Federico wrote part of Dunlop's speech, he uses a slogan, "America First." And we thought that was great because it had some historical ties that weren't too savory, and it is exactly the sort of populist sloganeering that would get people riled up and behind someone. And literally 8 days later, Trump comes out with the exact same slogan. So we had to scramble and say, do we rewrite the episode? Do we, and I made a decision that we don't. That I think the more interesting story is that we wrote it before Trump did, but for the exact same reasons. And it led credence, I think, in my mind, to the kind of political animal that Dunwalk is, that something like this could actually happen. Now, we also were trying very hard to make this a kind of a nonpartisan story. I've emphasized to a lot of people that this is not a show about politics, that it's about government. And I think those are different things. It was important to us that Pierce be a Republican and a well-liked one and a successful one. And so we don't really have a lot of policy debates. You couldn't tell where Pierce comes down on trade deals, for instance, versus Dunwalk. So I think we tried to tread lightly there and fulfill a vision of storytelling that isn't so closely linked to the current events that clearly ended up mirroring the story.
I think the weirdest part about the whole thing for me, there was a moment when the America First thing was definitely the strangest kind of little moment. But there was a moment when it started to become apparent that Trump might actually get there, and I sat down with Lindsay and I said, I'm really concerned. Like, how do we, given how things are right now, how do we make the Dunwalk character scarier than Trump? And Lindsay was like, that is not even remotely the point, to make this guy scarier than Trump. The point is to make him believable, that he could actually win, and then Trump went out and won. So it was just it's been interesting to navigate those things.
Was there any thought process, and personally, I wouldn't fault either one of you if that was the case, because I think I would. Was there any leaning in on the concept, though? Because your first episode came out 12 days after the election. If I understand correctly, the last one's scheduled for Inauguration Day or close to it.
Yeah, very close.
It fits so well. I mean, was there any idea of sort of leaning into this concept? Oh, yeah.
I think we were. It was obvious to us that we had a story that went in real time between, the episode 1 is election night and episode 13 is Inauguration Day, and it would be fantastic if we could align those things in real time. So we were acutely aware of the timing. We had plans to come out on election night, and for a variety of reasons, production and marketing decisions, we decided not to do that. So we were actually maybe 2 or 3 weeks behind real time, but every episode is pretty much the next week. And that was a conscious decision.
Oh, and I think it's a great one because I think there are a lot of people in the world who, you see it all in social media very often, where people sort of need that escape, or they want that alternative narrative, or something that makes them feel better, or whatever the case, or anything that can help people process, irregardless of where your true political leaning is. And I think Terms is doing that for a lot of folks. And you can't minimize in any way, I would say, the appeal of the story, given the world that we all live in. And I think that for you guys to time it out the way you did was brilliant, and I think that it just leads to its relevance and for now, but I also think even from a looking back standpoint, it will have a certain historical artifact to it as people continue to find this show in the future.
Well, let's hope so. I don't,
Indeed. Thank you. Let's say for, inshallah.
Yeah, I think that's the case, and I think people will look at it that way. There will be, I would argue that 5 years from now, somebody's going to find Terms, subscribe to the first one, and they're going to look back and say, wow, this was where sort of the creative storytellers in the U.S. were at this point, and look at what they produced, they may or may not ever be aware of the coincidental nature of it, but they'll be able to look at this as sort of America's interpretation, if you will. And I think that makes it important, and that makes the storytelling resonate even years in the future.
Well, thank you.
Let me ask you guys this. As we are sitting here with episode 9 about to come out, or people may be able to see 9 at this point, what's the critical reception been like from listeners, from the press, from your own colleagues? What's the reception been like?
Overwhelmingly positive. Like I said before, the biggest complaint has been the episodes are too short. And so we just cannot thank people enough for all the support. Particularly when people are leaving reviews and saying things on social media. We understand that those aren't things that people have to do. It's great that they love the show, and we just can't appreciate enough the extra effort they go through to let people know how much they love the show. So it's been great to hear. I'm looking for. We finally got our first 1-star review. That was great.
Now you're a real podcast.
Now we're a real podcast, so that was great. I was starting to get worried. I was like, is Wondery just like paying for all these amazing reviews? Nope. We finally got the bad one, so that was good. But it really has just been overwhelmingly positive. And apparently, people are asking Lindsay a lot about Blue Apron and his dulcet tones in these ads in the middle. So that's how much people are loving the show. They're sticking around and listening to Lindsay talk about rice flour.
Mm-hmm. I heard that one.
It makes for a crispy fish, I got to tell you.
I will tell you this. I'm an ad skipper only because I listen to so many shows. I've pretty much heard every ad. Although I think what you're referring to is on the most recent one at the time of the recording was episode 8. And Lindsay, I heard you start into the I've never bought rice flour, and I didn't even know I needed it, or however you started that, and I stopped. I was like, what is he talking about? It made me pause and be like, this isn't Blue Apron. What is it? What is he talking about? Rice flour. I've never heard this advertised.
All right, yeah. Little misdirection to get you involved.
It was great. So we touched a little bit on the future, but I do want to give folks anything that you guys are willing to share. You mentioned a second show in the works, Dichotomy. Can we talk any more about what folks will see there?
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that. Dichotomy is, so when we were soliciting pitches for shows, I had been talking to this local actor and personality, Josh Kumler. He has this great show called Bar Politics, and it's kind of like a local version of The Daily Show. So he and his team report on local politics once a month at bars in a very amusing kind of half-hour show. He's very charismatic, and I went to see one of these Bar Politics shows when I first moved to Dallas, and they had done such a great job with the writing and the pacing of the performance that even though I had no idea about anyone in local politics here in Dallas, and I didn't frankly care at the moment, I was able to follow along with everything, and the jokes were funny, and it all kind of worked. So I sat down with Josh, and I just said, look, you're clearly smart, funny, you know what you're doing, you can organize a team. What do you want to do? And so he brought a couple of ideas to us, and he started pitching this concept about Dallas is the most economically segregated city in the country in terms of income inequality. And that concept fascinated him. And so he wanted to put together this show where we looked at people on opposite sides of this divide. And I started to get goosebumps, and we started to talk about it a little bit more. And we were like, okay, so where can we take this concept, and how can we kind of build it out into something that's more than just a tearjerker documentary? And so after kicking it around a little bit, we came up with the idea to let's look at serious issues through maybe a mundane or funny lens. And so in the first season, we're going to be looking at income inequality, gentrification, immigration, and cultural appropriation through the lens of tacos. And so,
Okay.
so we're working on that show right now. We're hoping to release it in spring of this year. So that's kind of the main one that we've been developing. And then we've got a handful of audio drama ideas that we're kicking around at the moment. A couple of other nonfiction podcasts. So we've got a few things in the works, but Dichotomy will probably be the one to hit your ears first.
Excellent. And I'll ask this question and can completely understand if it's way too early to answer, but do we expect another sort of partner distributor or something under Spoke Media only, or still to be determined?
I think still to be determined. We're actually we're going to be talking to a few folks at the end of this month and the beginning of next month, and kind of seeing what's out there.
Marvelous. I just like to ask in case somebody is listening months from now and may want to take a look. So absolutely. Be on the lookout for anything Spoke Media. Well, that name will definitely lead you to stuff with us for sure. Perfect. Well, gentlemen, if anyone listening to this for some reason has not heard Terms and would like to get in on this train we've been describing, please, either one of you, tell them where they can find your great stuff and as well as Spoke as a whole.
Absolutely. You can go to spokemedia.io for you audio nerds out there. The IO is just for you. Spokemedia.io to check out all things Spoke Media. You can find Terms on Wondery.com or the new Wondery app. And of course, you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And we have the socials, yes.
Yes, at Spoke Media LLC, at Terms Podcast for Twitter, Spoke Media LLC and Terms Podcast on Facebook, and Spoke Media LLC on Instagram.
Well, and as you guys already know, you will find links to all of that in the show notes as well. Lindsay Graham, Keith Reynolds, thank you both very much for taking the time to talk about Terms.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for walking me through the plug at the end there. I appreciate it.
No problem. It's what I do, Keith. It's what I do. And folks, that will do it. Episode 125. Right there. What you guys think? Is Terms sound pretty awesome to you or what? I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And as I mentioned, and sometimes the audio dramas you got to really pay attention to. Terms makes that super easy, and I think you're really going to love it if you listen to it. And folks, if you enjoyed this episode, do me one quick favor. How about an iTunes review? Let's make that our push this week, all right? I've had a lot of great feedback and reception from so many of you for the show, and I'm really glad so many of you are checking out and enjoying it. But I feel like it's just a little low in iTunes review category. So if one or two of you could take just a moment and hop on over to iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher, wherever you find the show, and leave a quick review, I'd really appreciate it. It would certainly mean a lot to me. But let's move on, shall we? Let's move on to next week. 126 is coming up next week, and it's going to be another great one, folks. I've been really fortunate these last couple of months to be super proud of some of the guests and conversations I've been having, and there's even more awesomeness coming your way. Boy, am I working on some things that I think you're really going to enjoy. So before I let you go, I just want to take another moment again and thank this week's show sponsor. That's Podbean, podbean.com/TPD. If you're thinking of starting a podcast or looking for a new and great home for your current show, you'll get your first month free if you sign up with podbean.com/TPD. So you can try all of Podbean's great hosting features with your first month for free. My thanks to them once again. That'll do it for episode 125. Next one coming at you next Sunday. Subscribe, follow, all the fun stuff. Thank you guys so much for listening. I wouldn't be doing this without you. Until next week, my name is Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at Pod Digest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.